Joining us now, the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris. Madam Vice President, good morning. It's good to see you.
Good morning. Good morning.
Well, as you know, the U.S. and its allies have unleashed massive sanctions on Russia, inflicting real pain on the Russian regime. We've seen actions from Western nations that were unthinkable 2 weeks ago. That said, Putin is continuing with this campaign. It grows more brutal by the day. Do you still believe these actions that the U.S. and the West have taken will be enough to stop him?
Well, Savannah, first of all, let's talk about the tragedy and the atrocity of what Russia is doing. This reinvasion of Ukraine, what it is causing in terms of loss of human life, what it means in terms of invading the sovereignty and territorial integrity of an independent nation. This is why the United States has been a leader in bringing together our allies, our NATO alliance, the EU, to stand firm and resolute with some of the most severe sanctions and consequences that we've ever seen as a unified group. And what has the impact been? Well, the impact already we've seen. The ruble is in a free fall. What we've seen is the Russian stock market is closed. What we've seen is that Russia has received a credit rating of basically junk. So we know it's having impact, but we also are acutely aware of the human tragedy of it all. I mean, just yesterday I saw an image, I'm sure you saw, of a missile that was just feet away from a children's playground. So this is an ongoing issue of great concern. Yesterday I spoke with, as I've been throughout the course of these many weeks and months, but yesterday I spoke with the prime ministers of Poland, of Latvia, Lithuania, Slovenia. I talked with Romania about what we will continue to do as the United States to support our allies and what we will continue to do to reassess on a constant basis.
In some ways, what you just said makes the point. I mean, these sanctions are having quite the effect on the regime, and yet the regime, Vladimir Putin, continues apace with some of these brutal attacks that are only getting worse by the day. So my question to you is, what more is the West and the U.S. prepared to do? Last night, the president ad-libbed a line. He said that Putin hasn't seen, he doesn't even know what's coming next. I'm ad-libbing there, but he basically said he doesn't even know what's coming. So what else do we have to throw at this when Putin so far is undeterred?
Well, we are going to continue to do what we've done. For example, in the sanctions, it's been sanctions against their financial institutions, against their oligarchs, where we are targeting their mansions and their jets. What we are going to continue to do is stand firm with our allies in terms of reassessing what we are doing with sanctions. Everything is on the table for consideration, frankly. What we are not going to do, and that must be said also, is, as the president has continuously said, we are not going to put U.S. troops in Ukraine to fight the Russians on the ground or in the air, but we are firm in our preparedness to defend our NATO alliance and our allies every inch of the NATO territory, and we will continue to do that. And then, you know, for example, yesterday when I was speaking with the Prime Minister of Estonia, we are also prepared to stand together, reassessing on a daily basis what are the needs of the Ukrainian people, constant contact with President Zelensky to make certain that on a daily basis we're addressing the humanitarian needs as well as the security needs and the economic needs of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people.
There is bipartisan agreement that there should not be U.S. direct military involvement in Ukraine, but I'm wondering if you could shed some light on where the lines are. For example, Putin is now prepared to lay siege to city centers like Kiev and Kharkiv. We've already seen it. Senator Rubio said it looked like it was going to be a medieval siege that could result in the starvation of millions. Here's my question. Is the U.S. willing to use any of its military capabilities, for example, cyber weapons, to help Ukraine defend itself?
As we have said, and I'll repeat, we're not going to put U.S. troops on the ground to fight Russians in Ukraine, and not on the ground or in the air. However, we have been supplying Ukraine and our allies with an extraordinary amount of support that is about security assistance and military assistance. As I'm sure you know, we have deployed thousands of U.S. troops to our NATO alliance countries, Poland being one example, because we are prepared to assist our allies with what they need in terms of support, for example, in receiving refugees. But also we are there because we are an alliance alliance. And as we have unified and continue to strengthen that alliance, part of the important component of that is that we stand together and we stand strong and resolute. And so we will continue to do that.
On another topic, would the U.S. be willing to share intelligence with Ukraine to facilitate some kind of strike, for example, on that convoy, that 40-mile Russian convoy that is currently situated right outside Kiev?
Well, I'm not going to get into the details of intelligence, which is obviously classified information, but I will say that, as has always been the case, we will share information with our allies that is in pursuit and support of our mutual concerns and priorities.
The Ukrainian ambassador has said the only way to really hit Putin where it hurts is to go after his oil and gas sector. And some senators agree, Republican and Democrat. Senator Joe Manchin, for example, mentioned that the U.S. is still currently buying approximately 600,000 barrels of crude and other petroleum products every single day. Is that on the table? Is that something that the administration would continue or would consider in terms of further sanctions, cutting off the oil and gas part of the economy for Russia?
Well, as you know, that on this issue, for example, we applaud Germany in terms of what it has done as it relates to Nord Stream 2, as it relates to what we need to do domestically as well as what we need to do in terms of this issue generally. We have, as the President said, reevaluated what we're doing in terms of the strategic oil reserve here in the United States to make sure that it will not have an impact, or we can mitigate the impact on the American consumer. But let's take this one step at a time, understanding that right now, on the issue of energy, our allies have stood firm and unified in a way that many of the pundits didn't predict would happen, to ensure that we are unified in our approach to this issue.
Let's talk about Vladimir Putin for a moment. Some former officials, former DNI Director James Clapper called him unhinged. Condoleezza Rice called him erratic. Robert Gates saying he's off the rails. Our own intelligence indicating that he is somewhat disconnected from reality. I know you're not a psychiatrist here, but how do you assess his mental state at the moment in terms of his calculations and his ambitions?
Well, listen, one thing is clear. Vladimir Putin has invaded Ukraine again, and we have been saying for weeks that we know it would happen. What is clear is that he intends to topple the Ukrainian government, and that is why we are standing firm and bringing our allies together to show our strength and our unified strength. And one thing I'm certain of, Savannah, is that what history will show is that Vladimir Putin basically ended up strengthening NATO and weakening Russia.
And finally, one of the more disturbing developments in the last week is Putin rattling his nuclear sword, putting his Russian nuclear forces on special combat readiness. Have you seen Russia take any concrete action to back that up? The U.S. did not respond in kind. Do you not take that as a serious threat?
Well, we listen to everything, obviously, but it is irresponsible to escalate, and we feel very strongly about this. As you know, we have a history of working with Russia in terms of this issue, and we will move on in terms of making sure that there is not escalation around this. Frankly, I think it's highly irresponsible. It's something we will obviously monitor, but our position is that we are not going to contribute to an escalation in that direction, and we have no intention of changing our posture.
Then in the few moments we have,
yeah,
there is obviously a refugee crisis. More than 600,000 Ukrainians have already had to flee. Some border countries are lifting restrictions, more or less saying, come on in. Will the U.S. do the same? Are we prepared to lift some of that red tape to accept Ukrainian refugees?
Well, right now, there is an urgent situation taking place, to your point, and you've been covering it. We're seeing hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians flee Ukraine because of the violence that Russia is exacting on that country. We have been giving support, for example, to our allies, such as Poland. When I spoke with the Prime Minister of Poland yesterday, we talked extensively about that and what we can do to continue to increase and to support the humanitarian assistance that is necessary to address the the refugees and ensure that they are being treated in a humanitarian way. We are going to continue to do the work of, in fact, American troops are there to help Poland in terms of processing folks as they are crossing the border to ensure that people are able to safely flee harm.
Vice President Kamala Harris, up late, early morning. We appreciate your time. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Find your favorite recipes, celebrity interviews, uplifting stories, shop our favorite deals, and so much more with the Today app. Download it now.